That gives you full access to all 3 days of events. So we highly encourage you to take advantage of that. We'll have keynotes, we'll have workshops, presenters, and this is all in the context of inclusive excellence in STEM. So without any further ado, again, I want to welcome everybody on behalf of the LSMRC leadership, and I'm going to turn over to Dr. Cami Valdez.
Great, thanks so much, Deb. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my slides with you all. Get that going, and we'll get started. And I'm going to hide the meeting controls for now. So if you are writing in the chat, as Deb mentioned, I'm going to be pausing throughout for us to, have time for questions, but we'll also have plenty of time at the end is my hope. It is a lot of content that I'm hoping to cover in this 2-hour session. So bear with me, and thanks for tuning in. And I will also have a number of questions where I would like to hear from you. So if you're willing to unmute, that would be fantastic. Or if you're unable to unmute and you want to write in the chat to respond to some of these questions, that'd be great too. And this is part 1 of a 2-part series about writing the Ronald E. McNair Postbaccalaureate Scholarship Program proposal. So I wanted to just start by getting a little bit of gauge about who's in the audience and what you know currently about the McNair Scholars Program, because that'll help me know what level of detail. What level of detail to kind of go into about it. So if anybody's willing to unmute and share a little bit about what you know so far about McNair, or anything else you want to share as we kind of gauge where you're at.
So I can go.
Thank you.
So I'm a faculty at the University of Detroit Mercy, and I wrote one or led a team in writing a McNair proposal in the last cycle, so in 2017. And so we don't currently have one, so so that's where we're at.
Yep.
Hi, Dr. Valdez, I can go as well.
Thanks.
I'm Tony Moreno, and here from Texas State with my colleague, Dr. Fitzpatrick. This is going to be our first joint attempt in writing for McNair, although we have several TRIO programs on campus. And we know that our university and our administration is very interested in us being able to secure this grant.
Great. Anybody else? Maybe
I can share.
Thank you.
Hi, Shanice Kent. I'm at the University at Albany. I was with the McNair Scholars Program at Binghamton University for 7 years and led the renewal in 2011. UAlbany had one many years ago, and we're looking at writing to receive the grant again.
Okay. Great.
Hi, my name is Sam Merriweather, and I'm with the Texas A&M University System Lsamp program. I am not very familiar with the McNair program, but I saw the newsletter and was interested in learning a little bit more about it. Now, I do know that Texas A&M University, which is our lead institution for our alliance, they did apply for it, but I don't believe that they were awarded the program. So I'm just trying to learn a little bit more about that process.
That's great. Yeah. And not to put you on the spot, but do you have any specific questions that you're hoping that I might answer today, but also to anybody else? But since you just went in your new.
Yes, so I am new to the process.
New to McNair, I should say.
Right, I'm new to McNair. So the person who was leading the grant last time, she reached out to us a few years ago when they wrote the grant. And so I just know a little bit about the process. I know that it's for post-baccalaureate students, and I'm just trying to learn a little bit more about it. The overview that you're gonna present today, I think is gonna be helpful for me to kind of get the information that I need.
Yeah. Anyone else want to share what are some of your questions, especially those of you who are seasoned writers and have been through the process before? Are there anything specifically that you're hoping to get out of today's session just to help focus the conversation?
Let me go in because Dr. Merriweather and I are good friends. He's from Texas A&M, and I'm from the University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley. And we went through the Lsamp program, and we are familiar with some of what McNair does, but my take on this opportunity is to see how can it fit in a Hispanic serving institution down in the Valley of South Texas, and can it really help on the post-bachelor's and post-baccalaureate, because we don't have quite the PhD program yet, but how do we integrate ourselves here?
Okay.
I guess my biggest question is, sort of how do we distinguish ourselves as, not an institution that already has one. You're at a competitive disadvantage because of the way the scoring is done.
Yeah.
And in particular, we lost basically all of our points in the data section, or the objectives, I should say. And so if there was this, tips in that area specifically, that would be helpful.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay, I think that's a good start. All right, so we will jump in. Here is the agenda, which is very broad. And of course, we're going to dive into each of these areas really as deeply as we can in 2 hours. I will say I went to a Council on Opportunity and Education workshop on the proposal writing last week, and it was a 2-day workshop. So we're doing 2 hours for context. So we'll do as much as we can in these 2 hours. So we'll start with just an overview of what the McNair Scholars Program is. We'll talk a little bit about how that does differ from Lsamp, because I know that many of you are working with Lsamp or interested may also be interested in having an Lsamp program and think about how those can work collaboratively. We'll talk about the proposal process timeline and things that you can get started with right away, as well as kind of thinking through when the actual deadline will be for this, which is not set. So that's important to note. And then lastly, we'll talk about just kind of getting started with writing that proposal, a little bit on the sections of the proposal. The first few sections is what we'll talk about today, which will cover that need, objective, and as well as the plan of operation, and we'll talk a little bit about logic models as well. Okay, so we'll start with this McNair Scholars Program as an overview. So what is the McNair Scholars Program? It is defined in the regulations as this really text-heavy description. So Ronald E. McNair Postbaccalaureate Achievement Program, which we just refer to as the McNair Scholars Program. It says that the secretary, which is Secretary of Education, shall carry out a program to be known as the Ronald E. McNair Postbaccalaureate Achievement, which will be designed to provide opportunities for research and other scholarly activities, summer internships, seminars, and other educational activities, tutoring, academic counseling, and assistance to participants in securing admissions to and financial assistance and enrollment in graduates programs. So this is the text-heavy official, version of what the McNair Scholars Program is, and I kind of think of it as this. So I think about it as a federally funded research program. So it's federally funded by the U.S. Department of Education, which is one difference from Lsamp, which is funded from the National Science Foundation. So U.S. Department of Education, or Ed, is the funding agency here, because although many people think of McNair as being kind of STEM focused, it is not, or it is not necessarily. It depends on how that you write your grant. whether or not it would be focused on a particular field. So it can represent all disciplines across the undergraduate fields. Folks tend to think of it as being STEM focused because of its namesake, Ronald E. McNair, who is an astronaut and is who the namesake is. And so folks think of it as STEM. In the 2017 cycle, they did have a competitive priority preference for STEM. And so many of the current programs do have a STEM slant, or some of them have a entirely STEM program, but that is not necessarily that's not required by any means. So it's a research program for undergraduates. It's supposed to support students from diverse backgrounds. We'll talk on the next slide a little bit more about what that is, because it is very, very specific for McNair. It also is aimed to help students with their graduate school applications. And so that is to help them with everything from identifying schools, figuring out what the right type of fit is for a graduate program for them, helping them with their essays and materials and things like that. And also talking to them about that financial aid or scholarships and fellowships and things like that for them to be able to fund that graduate education. And then it's supposed to also prepare the students for graduate school. So preparing them to be ready to take on that type of academic rigor, understanding what graduate education is and how that it differs from undergrad. And, having had the research experiences that students have as part of the McNair Scholars Program, that is, the bulk of helping them, get prepared for that. But there's also a number of seminars and workshops and things that you do with this program that really help to prepare them for graduate school. I'll pause there to see if there's any questions yet, just in case before we kind of dive into more specifics. We're following, we're good? Okay, awesome. Okay, so I mentioned a little bit about the eligibility for these diverse students. I think this is one of the most complicated aspects of McNair. And so we have this 2/3, 1/3. So 2/3 of your cohort must be first generation and low income, and that is an and, they come together. So first generation being first in your family to earn a bachelor's degree, a 4-year level, 4-year college degree. And low income is at the 150% of poverty rate. And so that's published on the Department of Education website. And I can also include that in the resources that'll go out after. There's a chart, it changes every year slightly, but there's kind of like the continuous US states, have one rate for different numbers of family members, and then Hawaii and Alaska are always slightly different. And so it has to be an and for that. So it is both of those. That's one category. The second category is historically underrepresented students from historically underrepresented backgrounds by race and ethnicity. And that is, it says in graduate education, however, they are very specific. So they are looking for Black or African Americans, Hispanics or Latinx students, Native Americans or Indigenous folks, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders. Often folks want to, admit students who are, say, Southeast Asian and, not well represented in graduate education. That is not one of those categories that counts as far as the legislation. And so this is all regulated by law. And so this is what we have to work with. And so for those types of exceptions, that requires approval by the Secretary of Education. So it actually requires an appeal, and it's only on a one-off basis for a particular student. It would not be inclusive of your program. So what you're writing for as far as like need for your program is these populations. The entire program could be first generation and low income. So you do not have to admit students, from the historically underrepresented backgrounds, but that's the 2/3, 1/3 breakdown. In addition, the students, of course, have to be U.S. citizens or permanent residents because it's federally funded. And you want to be selecting students, of course, who are interested in graduate education and going on to a doctoral degree, as that's the purpose of the program. Questions on this, on the eligibility, because this is honestly, this is one of the huge sticking points for McNair that's really challenging to kind of wrap your head around.
I wondered if you could just sort of say it again. You said your whole population that you recruit could be first generation and low income.
Yes.
But then nested within that, you still need at least 1/3.
No.
What? Okay.
So it's 2/3 or more. So 2/3 is the minimum of first generation and low income.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
That's a good question.
Amy, can I add one more question? So I thank you for the details, but I was reading on the program and I just want to make sure this is preparation for doctoral studies, correct?
Yeah.
And so we either at the post or graduating seniors or master students who are thinking of, or strictly undergraduates pushing them to the doctoral program?
Undergraduates, yes. Yep. So one of the, we'll get into a couple models of what the program will look like next, but one of the things in the legislation is around the funding. So some programs admit students as early as, say, sophomore year, or some maybe even have pre-programs. So they have kind of pipeline programs for students who are in their first year or second year or both to kind of help get them ready to get into McNair. And the regulations, you are unable to provide funding towards a student until they have completed their sophomore year or equivalent in credits. And so for the summer research stipends, which we'll talk again a little bit more about later, those can't happen until after the sophomore year. So it couldn't happen between first year and second year. It has to happen after that sophomore year when you're a rising junior. And so you could have the sophomore say in your program, but you can't pay them a research stipend. You could, you know, of course, if there was a seminar that you were giving, of course, they would be welcome to attend and things like that. You just can't pay that direct cost of a stipend to them. Yeah. Did you have another question?
Can I follow up?
Yeah.
So you know, so that's what I understand about the McNairs is strictly undergrads preparing for the doctoral program. But if is the doctoral program has to be local institutional doctoral program, or can it be just they apply and get admitted wherever?
They can get admitted wherever. Yep. Yep. Does not have to be local, does not have to stay at your institution. So, you know, some schools who are, you know, R1 institutions who are, you know, who have those PhD programs, you know, may want to house this in, say, their, you know, graduate school diversity office or something like that. But it is not required that they stay at that same institution. Dr. Fitzpatrick?
Hi, and I may be jumping ahead, so forgive me if you're going to get to this. My question lies around what happens. Well, let me back up. So let's say you have a cohort, mostly sophomores. A lot of programs are not directly from undergrad into a doctoral program. So there's this gap.
Yep.
So how do you get credit for students who just may not be there yet because they would not have completed a PhD program at the end of that cycle?
So, yeah. So
hopefully that made sense.
No, it does. Yeah. So this might be jumping the gun a little bit, but we can talk about it. So currently, the way that the kind of points work, and we'll talk more about this, but the students have to go directly into graduate school from undergrad. A gap year will not count for you as a program. We are working, and we being MAP, the McNair Association of Professionals, which I'm on the exec board as the past president, with COE, Council for Opportunity and Education, which is the advocacy group for all TRIO programs. We are working with them on trying to increase that, or that there would be a gap allowed. Right now, they're advocating for an 18-month gap, but that has to be approved by the Department of Education. So we will see. But we are seeing, of course, and I know you all are seeing that on the ground as well, that students want to take a gap year or years before they are ready to really pursue graduate education after finishing their undergraduate degrees. So currently, students are expected to go immediately into graduate school. A master's would be fine. You know, that counts towards the prior experience points, which we'll talk about later. But where it gets tricky is if the master's is only 1 year, you may lose points for them continuing into their program if they don't immediately switch into a PhD or things like that. But in the first, it would take 3 cycles before you would be kind of having the grant, before you would be kind of judged on your doctoral attainment. So there is some time to your advantage for that part on the prior experience points. Did I get your question, Dr.?
Yes, thank you so much for that.
And we'll talk more about this. So for folks that are like, I have no idea what she's talking about, we'll get there, I promise. Anything else on like just the program itself or the eligibility before we jump into a couple of different models?
I'm sure you'll get to this, but you already kind of hinted at it.
Yeah.
Are there size limitations to how large a cohort could be?
That's a great question, which I don't have in my slides. So the minimum for 2017 was 26 students had to be in the cohort. And so, you know, you can think about that and we'll get into the models right now, but as, you know, maybe 13 juniors and 13 seniors, or you could think of it as a couple sophomores that are kind of in the pipeline. And yeah, so you can think about it any way you want, but 26 is the minimum number of students, at least as of the last RFP. Don't know what will come this time, but it won't jump significantly. So I'm going to give you 2 different types of models. There's a lot of different models for McNair programs, just so you all can think. Oh, sorry. Yep. Shanice, you're on mute.
Sorry, I didn't realize I hit it. So I will say at Binghamton, we had 40. You do have to think about how competitive your program is if you do just the bare minimum. You can pull off of the TRIO website who's funded, and it used to be you could get the spreadsheet would tell you how many students each program was funded, and you'll see that many programs serve more than that 26 because they look at the cost for each student. So if you have more than the minimum, you're in theory lowering your costs, that sort of thing. So you know, I would go over that 26 minimum.
Yes, excellent point. Thank you. Yes, 26 is a minimum. And of course, some of that's going to depend also on the need at your institution, you know, what your institution size is and what you'd be able to handle. You don't want to propose that, you know, you could take on 40 and say you're an institution of like, you know, 2,000 or 2,500 undergraduates, and you know, you don't have a ton of students who would meet these criteria. So you want to be mindful of balancing both that yes, you want to serve the maximum number of students possible to really, you know, maximize what the grant's able to provide for students, while also being realistic, because maintaining those numbers is critical to continuing your grant. Yeah, great point. Okay, so I'm going to give 2 models, and of course, there are many different models, and so these are just kind of like broad generalizations of a lot of different programs, but these are 2 examples, and we can talk more about questions that you all have on this, but what a program can look like. So the first one I have here is where that you would have a summer research institute. And so you might run an 8 or 10 week summer research institute where that you are working with the scholars on, you know, developing their research question, their research proposal, and that type of stuff over the summer. You're really helping them think about what methods they might be using and kind of their approach to doing the question. And so in a model like this, you would probably admit your students in their sophomore year. And that can happen at any time in that year. So that's up to you to design when that makes sense. And then over that summer, when they're in the rising junior summer, so between sophomore and junior year, they would do that research institute that would be led by the program, likely by the program director. But of course, it depends on what the staff makeup is. You also might have faculty involved in that who would also be helping run these workshops. You might also have writing faculty who are involved because they are writing that proposal and thinking about what their project might be. So you could think of a number of campus partners who might be involved here. And then during the academic year and their junior years, they might do research with a faculty mentor. And then the next summer, they might have a part 2 to that, summer research institute, where that's really around kind of like a grad school boot camp, where that maybe you're giving them lots of information on how to apply to grad school, having them start working on their statement of purpose, things like that. Just helping them with that process, identifying schools, etc. And then their senior year, they go back to doing research and work on those grad applications. Of course, this is just like a generic model, and any number of these factors could be changed around, but just to give you an idea of what a summer research institute could look like. Many programs also do this type of model where that they've got this academic year research methods course. So it's like taking that summer institute, but doing it over the academic year. And so here I had it start with junior year that you would admit the scholars. It doesn't have to be, but sometimes that's what folks do. And so then there wouldn't be that first summer for you. You could also admit them in the sophomore year, and over the junior summer, maybe they're not doing anything specific for McNair. But once that junior academic year hits, that's when they're enrolled in a course. If you want it to be for credit, it could also just be, seminars that you have that kind of make up this time. So again, depends on what you want for the program. And so this model uses the academic year, research methods course. Again, you're teaching them about the methods for how to do research, have them work on developing that proposal, think about what they're going to be doing in their research. I will also add the caveat here, because we are coming from the Lsamp and NSF perspective, that I find this hard in the sciences, because as a scientist myself, who is an Lsamp scholar, I didn't do any proposal development. I didn't do any of these things. My PI had the project, and maybe I had some choice over like, here's projects A and B, which one do you want? But I really wasn't involved in that. And so thinking through like, how does that work for a science student, I think would be especially important if that might be an emphasis that you're going to have in your proposal. But for the humanities and the social sciences, I think this works really well. And then in their rising senior summer, they might do summer research at their home institution, working with that faculty member that they've now proposed this project for, actually getting to take, actually getting to see that to fruition. And then in the senior year, of course, working on their grad applications and doing research with that faculty mentor. And so that's just two types of models. I don't know, Shanice, do you want to share about what your model looked like at your previous institution?
So sure, we did admit sophomores as soon, and each campus can kind of determine what that sophomore year. At Binghamton, it's a 4-credit university. Most courses are 4 credits. So it's not as clean as the 3-credit university. So it was a very particular number. After a certain amount of credits, we counted them as sophomores. We did have academic year programming. Because it was 40, we only had enough summer research dollars for a certain amount each cohort year. So that's 20 students in the summer would do research, but you can also count if your students go elsewhere for research. So if they're in REUs, we also looked at, because one of the prior experience points is how many students are engaged in research. We also counted things like academic year research. Were they in independent studies? but we're very similar to this. We did not have a research methods course, although it was written into, I believe, the renewal.
Okay.
We did have through the Lsamp program that I also am one of the Lsamp co-PIs for the SUNY Alliance, and I ran the Lsamp program at Binghamton as well. We did have a freshman year course, freshman and new transfer, so I could get some McNairs from that course. And the students, it was really designed for Lsamp, but we opened it up to student support services, McNair Scholars, a larger population. And then we had so that was always fall semester. Spring semester, we had an online junior year grad prep course, because I used to do workshops and boot camps on applying to grad school, and found it was more useful to do it during the academic year. Students got 2 credits, and we did the nuts about in both of the grad application process in that spring semester with juniors, rising seniors.
Yep, thanks. Yeah, and I will say, at Wellesley, we also did a writing course we did it senior fall. So we did a writing course on applying to grad school. So the course was co-taught by a writing instructor and by myself as the McNair director. And we helped them, through the course, basically put together their grad application materials. And so we did it senior fall. There was a lot of debate whether junior spring would be better than, senior fall. And that, I think, is still up for debate. And so, but that's another course type thing that could be built into these programs rather than just the methods-based courses.
I would also, for campuses that have multiple programs like Lsamp or student support services, work with those offices as well when writing this grant. So for our junior prep course or our college graduate school prep course, it was co-taught with somebody from student support services. We have a C-STEP program. So there were more hands.
Yes.
It lightened my load to have, instead of doing it just by myself. And we were also able to open up to other students.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about campus partners as we continue on. Okay, so I'm going to keep going because I see the time. We're 30 minutes in and we've got a lot to cover still. So we just want to talk a little bit about, again, continuing to dive in a little bit on the structure of the program. So services provided, there are services that you must provide, and there are services that you may provide. And the legislation is pretty specific on that. And so I have in the slides all of these details, which is directly from the legislation, but I am going to, in the interest of time, skip to my summary slide. So the first slide is on the must provide. And so there are 6 services that you must provide, and then there are 4 services that you may provide. And so again, you'll get these slides after the fact, so you can take a look at those in more detail, but this is my summary of those. So on the left-hand side in the blue box, there are the services that you must provide. So the first is that research and other scholarly activities. This is one that you'll be continually be getting kind of graded on. So this is a really important category. The second is summer internships. So those, when they talk about summer internships, what they're talking about there is paid McNair internships. So McNair is able to provide $2,800 for a research stipend for students per year. And many folks think that that's not quite enough when you compare that to the REU programs and whatnot. And so that's an opportunity that you could talk to your institution to see about a top up to bring that to say $4,000 or $5,000 to match what other programs are doing. But that's something to consider, that's has been that way since the start of McNair and has not been increased, although again, that's things that we're trying to work with, advocating with COE on. Seminars are things that you must provide. So seminars primarily, relating to applying to graduate school and helping the students with that, but also seminars around, professional development. You can have faculty come in and talk about, their experiences as either first gen, low income, or people of color, sharing their journey as academics, things like that. And you could also do things that go to the May category, things like financial literacy and things like that with your seminars. Tutoring is a must provide. And again, that's an opportunity for plugging into existing resources that may already be at your institution. So if you do have other TRIO programs, SSS has tutoring that's required, that might be one that you could plug into. My institution, our tribal center has tutoring for students. We also have PASS tutors, and I forget the acronym for that, but it's for our sciences. So we specifically have tutors in the STEM fields. So thinking about what are some of those areas that you could get, institutional commitment from, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel or provide grant funding towards specifically. And then academic counseling. And so this is really around advising students. This is primarily probably going to be done by your McNair staff, but may also be done by other folks on campus, like advisors or counselors that you already have on campus. And then grad admission assistance, of course, is a must, because that is the objective of the program, is to help get those students into graduate programs. On the May side of things, this is in the white box on the right-hand side. So financial literacy is a service that you may provide, remembering that our students are primarily low income, and workshops on, everything from budget management and just like, thinking about fellowships. So how to fund graduate school. And that also, again, bridges back to the must services. And things like that. Faculty mentoring is surprisingly a May category. And so if your students are doing research with faculty, they should be being mentored by those faculty members. So this to me seems like a must, but is not written as a must. Cultural events are also a service you may provide, and those can range in scope. They are very hard to tie down and really dependent on your program specialist, whether or not they get approved. So that's something to figure out a little after the fact. If you are awarded, what you might be able to get approved for the cultural events. And then other activities, and I don't even know what goes under other activities, but there's other. And so we started to talk a little bit about prior experience points, and I think it's important just to kind of get a little bit of perspective on what those are. So for grants that are existing, there are these prior experience points that are available, and this is what Rick was talking about earlier, that you're a little bit at a competitive disadvantage when you're applying as a brand new program, because you are not yet eligible for these points. So these are worth 15 points that you just don't have as a brand new program when you're applying. So the categories for these are the number that you're funded for. And so that's worth 3 points each year. So that's that number of students that you're funded to serve and that you actually met those metrics. So that's why you don't want to say, oh, of course I'm going to take 40. And it turns out you could never get 40 on your campus. You want to make sure that you are doing a realistic number for that. Research or other scholarly activities, that's going to be something that comes up again and again. So prior experience points for that. So post-baccalaureate programs, so students that go on to enroll in graduate school, is worth 3 points. Continuing in that graduate program, so if they're continuing on to that second year of the master's or second year of the PhD, et cetera, that's worth 4 points. And then finally, doctoral degree attainment is worth 2. And so that's a total of 15. And then what that looks like over the course of the grant is that really, although I wrote year 1, 2, and 3, these are the years that count, which is really your second, third, and fourth year. Yeah, second, third, and fourth year of the grant. The first year doesn't count, and the last year doesn't count towards these prior experience points, because the first year you're still getting established, and the last year is when you're going to be applying again for that renewal. And so what they do is take the average of these points to determine what your prior experience points are. So they'll take the average of the middle 3 years of the grant, years 2, 3, and 4. And I will update that whenever I send out the slides. But this just gives you kind of the map for the full perspective. And so while it is too soon to think about those prior experience points, what you can do is be thinking about how you're going to design your program to maximize those points, because in the end, those are the points that you're going to have that are going to be those kind of bonus or extra points when you're going up against folks like us that are going to be the newbies applying in the next cycle. So you want to be thinking about how you design that program to be able to maximize those points, keeping that always in perspective. So I'm going to pause there because I think that that's probably a good spot to pause again for questions, comments, thoughts, etc. Or for crystal clear, we'll keep going. All right. Awesome. So I did want to talk a little bit about how McNair differs from Lsamp. And so I want to start with, again, this image. And so I think at the surface that there's a lot of things that overlap really well with Lsamp. Again, federally funded research program, supporting those diverse students, helping them get, their grad applications and preparing them for grad school. So all of those things Lsamp is able to achieve, but there are many nuances in the nitty gritty that differ. So Lsamp being federally funded by NSF and McNair being funded by Department of Education. Diverse students for Lsamp is, students of color, fairly, more broadly than the 2/3, 1/3, and then also in the helping the students get ready for graduate school and preparing them for that. I think McNair has a lot more specifics, right? That there's a lot more requirements. So to me, the big differences are really the 2/3, 1/3. So what that cohort looks like, and the may versus must type of requirements for the services provided, where Lsamp, I think, gives a little more flexibility. You get to design a lot more of that yourself. McNair is really specific and kind of outlines, this is what you have to do. And so these are the metrics you have to meet. And so I think this is really the crux of where those two programs differ. And so now we'll dive a little bit into the program proposal timeline. And so the first thing here is that the RFP has not been released, and it won't be released until probably early January or February 2022. And we are anticipating that the deadline for the applications will be February or March of 2022, giving us 30 to 45 days to write upon the release of that RFP. And that sounds super scary for all of you who write grants, but there's some good news. So the first is that we do not anticipate that the questions are going to change from the 2017 application cycle. So the questions are going to remain the same. The thing that's unknown right now is really what that competitive preference priority will be. At the COE writing workshop that they had last week, speculation was around continuing the competitive preference priority around STEM may continue, or that there also might be one around technology, particularly coming out of this pandemic and how much that everyone has had to adapt to that. And so that is what they are predicting. We don't know, of course, all of that speculation, so we will see, but you can start now. So, use that 2017 RFP to start writing. There's really not going to be many differences to expect in the 2022 application, and so you can get started with the bulk of that now. So kind of thinking about that timeline, the way I think about it is really that, the first phase is that data gathering phase. So you're going to be identifying resources. That's going to include, campus partners. That's going to include, key personnel, key folks to be on your team helping you to do that. And then also thinking about like what resources you have on campus that you'll be able to include as part of your application, and also lots of data. And we'll talk more about data as we continue on. And then the second phase is really that writing and editing process, starting to really put together that grant, hopefully getting lots of folks to read it. Do not do it in isolation. And also sign up for some COE workshops if you are a member of COE, if your institution is a member. I know that they'll be having one again in the fall. And for those, you can actually submit a draft and get a reviewer who is an experienced McNair staff member to look over that for you, so you can get some feedback on that. And then finally, the submission process. And there are lots of checks and balances when you submit. And so submitting early is really important to make sure that everything was accepted and that you don't get to that phase of the website crashing. Laurelyn.
Cami, were you saying DOE or COE? And where is this place that has these workshops that you were talking about?
C like cat, COE, Council for Opportunity and Education.
Okay.
So if your institution is a member, if you have other TRIO programs, then you might already be a member, but it might be worth investing, to get that membership if you aren't already. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you all who you think might be some of your campus partners that you will need for this program. Get your input. What are you thinking as you're thinking about how to put together this grant? Not all at once.
Texas A&M. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dana.
It's all at once. This never happens.
I put in the chat student support services for sure, in terms of designing. Dr. Moreno and myself, we've been meeting a lot with faculty and staff just to get ideas and garner support. So those are like one of the big two for me. Go ahead, Sam.
All right, thank you. So I was thinking about our Lsamp, maybe had 3 of those musts already kind of, we're kind of supporting there.
Yeah.
But then we would also probably reach out to, we have an academic success center here at Texas A&M. So that would definitely be on the radar. And probably we also have a undergraduate education, like the Dean of Undergraduate Education.
Mm-hmm.
Her program will probably hook in to that too. So those are some immediate partners I thought about.
Great.
And when you talk about data, clearly the institutions of higher education are going to be tracking if we're making sure that we keep with the 2/3, 1/3 requirement. So we're going to be, talking a lot with our registrar and our to be able to get that data.
Yes.
So in particular, I was trying to get the details of the data from the RSP. Are we going to go into some of that? Do you know?
We are. Yeah. We'll talk more about data. It's coming up. All right. No, these are great campus partners that you've all already started to think about. And so I kind of thought about it in kind of 2 different pots. So I thought about the kind of getting started and then the drilling down. So for me, getting started, the type of things, that you're going to need in your campus partners is first, like, as Hiram was already starting to allude to, is really that data is going to be a critical piece. And so if you have an institutional research office, they will become your best friends. A registrar, of course, is also going to have a lot of the data for you. Financial aid is also likely going to need to be involved. So the institutional research can help you with things like pulling, students, numbers of students, can pull iPads data and things like that, can pull the first gen data for you, but often they don't have access to that financial aid information. So you might need financial aid to work in partnership with institutional research to say, okay, well, these first gen students, can you pull them and see, are they, what's their financial aid level? And so for getting the low income piece for your right, first gen and low income, it likely is going to be a proxy, right? You're going to have to use something as a proxy. So that may be Pell Grant eligible, that may be either at your institution they're on what you consider to be high financial aid, or something along those lines. So you're going to have to figure out what that proxy will be. To try to find, a reasonable proxy for meeting that criteria of low income. You're also, of course, going to need to work closely with your grants or sponsored research programs office, whatever you may call it at your institution. If you do have other TRIO programs at your institution, those would be first folks to kind of connect with. So these are folks just kind of like, just getting started. These are the people I must see. And then as you begin to think more about the grant and the types of services and things that you're going to provide, also be thinking about where that this thing might be housed. That is a really important piece. There's also things like, as you all know, political landmines at institutions, and thinking about, okay, well, who thinks that they should own this versus where should this really live? Is it on the academic side of the house because it is an undergraduate research program? It is an academic program in nature, helping students go to graduate school, or is this a student affairs? Should this be owned by student affairs because we are talking about, diverse students? This may be where your diversity office lies, or other things like that. And you're, supporting your whole student, and that you want to go with a holistic approach, student affairs. So that's a big decision from the start. And advice that I've received is like, maybe see who's willing to support, like who's willing to support what. So find out some of that information if you're able to, figure out who will support what you're looking to do in that grant in the best way possible. So those are some folks who might need to be involved. And I also want to mention here that as you think about these too, thinking about how that they might give commitments to different aspects of what you're going to propose that you're going to do. So academic affairs may be able to, waive the tuition, say, for these courses that you're going to propose that you're going to do. If you're doing a methods research course, or if you're doing a graduate application writing course, right? Maybe academic affairs is able to waive that tuition for you. So that could be a really excellent partner. Student affairs may be able to provide you with a grad assistant to give you kind of free, FTE towards your grant without you having to use those grant dollars towards that type of staffing, right? So that might be something that student affairs could offer, right? So thinking about those pieces. Of course, if you have a cultural office, cultural center, diversity office, any number of those types of things, Samuel mentioned academic success, that'd be another great partner. So any of those types of offices are going to be important partners for this work. Undergraduate research, also, if you have an undergrad research office or Office of Undergrad Education or something along those lines, those folks might be good partners. The advising team is another important partner in this work. Any tutoring, we talked about that before. If SSS or other offices already have tutoring, how can you work with them collaboratively to reduce your cost on the grant, but also maximize services that are already available. Residential life is another one that I thought about that might make sense here. So as you're thinking about those summer research opportunities your students may need to live on campus. So even in just writing your grant, if maybe that's something that could be waived on your campus to get the cost of the living down, but that's an allowable expense on the grant is for their housing for the summer. But you also need to know how much does that cost, or can you get a better negotiated price for your grant? And so you want to have that figured out as you're putting together those materials too. Not an obvious partner, that's why I put it on there. Thinking about who you might need buy-in from on your campus, and I will open the floor for folks to start brainstorming as you're thinking about your own campuses. Who are you going to need buy-in from? No one? No buy-in needed?
I mean, it was mentioned the president, but the higher up you go, the more they will try to take it over, and
Yeah.
And then submit it. There'll be the PIs and ask the faculty, "Oh, you run it." So
I was thinking, you done, Moya?
yeah, well, yeah, pretty much. You guys get but that's kind of what happens sometimes.
Okay, yeah, somebody is putting in a chat too. I was thinking about our provost.
I can't see the chat. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, you're fine. So Dana said the president and faculty and staff, and I believe is that Curie? Curie said dean of undergrad, dean of graduate studies, provost. So yeah, I was thinking about our provost would have to probably sign off on this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So these are great ones. So you'll definitely need buy-in from senior administration and faculty to be able to be successful with this. So I kind of thought about it from top down, that you're definitely going to need that buy-in from your president, because they are going to have to sign off on this. It has to be signed off by them. But you'll also think about maybe like vice president of research, if you have one of those at your institution, might need to be involved. Other senior administrators, deans, VPs, etc., provosts, in academic side of the house, or student affairs, depending on where you decided to house your grant. You also will want to have strong support from other TRIO directors that are on campus, if you do have other TRIO programs, or other programs such as Lsamp or similar ones, MARC, or other ones that can kind of tie in. And then, of course, you're going to want to have support from your sponsored programs or grants office. I use those interchangeably, so the nomenclature changes, I'm sorry. But you're going to want to have support from them and a lot of buy-in. And then, of course, you're going to need commitment and buy-in from those faculty, because the faculty are what's going to make the program. You have to have, PIs that you can entrust these students to go to. For those of you who already have an Lsamp program, of course, you know that. You don't want to send your students to anyone. You really want to make sure that they're getting a good mentored experience, and it's going to encourage them to continue on towards the PhD. So getting really good faculty behind that. And I put a caveat here that there's going to be many, many more folks that you're going to need buy-in from on campus, but this is just to kind of get you started and thinking about that. And so data. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the data that you need for the proposal, because that's going to be really important and time consuming. So data. So you want to use data to help you tell your narrative. So this proposal, and we'll talk more about the points and stuff in the next section, but it's a 60-page proposal. And so you don't want that to be straight narrative. You do not want 60 pages of narrative, because would you read that? And so you'll be able to make use of data. And since this is folks coming in from the Lsamp community, hopefully you all are excited to have data and create charts and graphs and all of that. So, using charts, using graphs, using tables as needed really will help you tell that narrative. You want to refer to those tables throughout. So you don't want to just like put a data and be like, oh, that explained it. You want to, have the table and then explain it and say, table as table 4 shows, and kind of use that to dive in deeper, but it'll give that visual representation that helps that reader break up that narrative while also saving you some space. You don't have to give every detail, but it'll help save some space and just text heavy writing. So lots of data representation that'll occur in this. And so I broke this up into institutional and national data. So first you want to start with a snapshot of your institution. So what type of institution are you at? Are you at a 4-year institution, 2-year institution, R1 institution? Like, what does that look like using kind of the Mellon, the Carnegie designation? What's the location? Are you in a rural area? Are you in an urban area? Are you, what does that look like? What does your community look like? Surrounding that institution, what are the academic disciplines that are represented that are going to be part of that McNair program, and some of their strengths. So what are you bringing to the table that your institution is already well known for? And then really want to look at who are those students that are at your institution. And so I broke down some of this data a little further as we think about specifically, data that's going to be around the need section. And we'll talk more about the need section in a little bit, but I thought that this was a good place to put this in. So you want to look at the number of students who are first generation and low income. Again, the and is important there. And so you're going to want to ideally represent that as a 2-year kind of cohort, because that's what you're looking at. You're looking at wanting to have like juniors and seniors. So you want to look at what's 2 years, how many students do I have in this population that might be eligible, right? You also might want to think about field, like, so if you are planning to narrow it down to be, say, STEM focused, then that narrows the number of students who will also be first gen and low income, who are part of your potential participants in your program. So you also want to think about that. And then you also, on the 1/3 side of the grant, students who meet that person of color definition by the Department of Education, ED. So again, looking at those numbers, ideally in that 2-year window. And if you're narrowing by field, also narrowing by field for those numbers, because you don't want to inflate your numbers and then find out later that there is no way possible you could support this program for your population. You also want to look at student retention of students who are completing the bachelor's degree. Either, you could look at 4 years, you could look at 6 years, but what does that look like at your institution? And you may want to compare McNair eligible students versus non-McNair eligible students. So you're wanting to get an accurate picture of this, because as you're telling your story, you're going to say, this is what it currently is. And with having the McNair program, this is what I'm hoping it will be, right? That by having this program, we are hoping that we're going to increase that student retention, getting students to complete that bachelor's degree as part of this program. And then you also want to look at students who go on to graduate education or PhD. And so again, at your institution. And so this is a little challenging because it depends on what your institution is tracking. So institutional research may have this data, alumni affairs may have this data, or the more stringent route is to work with your registrar and look at the clearinghouse, the name of it's escaping me. Shanice, do you know the name? I always do it wrong. I always say the big check one instead of the
National Student Clearinghouse.
Yes, thank you. Yes. National Student Clearinghouse. Thank you. I always do the big check one, Publishers Clearinghouse instead. I'm like, that's not it, but Clearinghouse. Yes. a national student clearinghouse. So you want to, you could figure out, like, you know, I don't know, take your most recent senior class and say, can you pull for me students of color who have gone on to graduate school? And they would have to individually look those students up. You know, they can submit a spreadsheet that would do that, but they would have to actually do that legwork. And so that's where this gets really time consuming for you to get some type of picture. You could also consider doing a, you know, local survey of, you know, McNair eligible students to try to figure that out. Career Services is another resource that might, Career Services is another one that might have this data, because they look at, you know, where do students go on to jobs and stuff. And so sometimes they also have for students who went on to graduate degrees, but they may not have the nuance of, you know, looking at PhD or, you know, academic discipline degrees versus professional degrees, right? So like their data might include like MBAs or MDs or whatever. So it does get difficult to kind of parse out, but these are types of things that you will want to gather as much as you can.
If your institution's large enough and you have a graduate program, you could also look at your current grad students, your domestic grad students, and see what the completion rate is for the PhDs, and get that demographic information for them and use those rates, which would be slightly easier than doing your students who graduated off. Yeah. So your institutional research office might like you better if you have a large enough grad program to pull from.
And then on the national data side, some comparisons really is what you're hoping to do, is take that data that you've gathered from your institution around retention and compare that to the national data. So how does that look for your McNair eligible students at your institution? And how does that look on a national scale? So is your institution doing as good as the national average or worse for these populations? Or if you're not able to kind of pull out for just McNair versus non-McNair, you could also use race and ethnicity as a proxy for this. And again, these are things that you can be representing in charts and then talking about in your narrative. So you can be pulling some graphs and things for this data.
Tammy, this is great, but which is the location where the national data can be accessed?
I have resources at the end of the slides that have lots of links and stuff to help you get started on that. Yeah. And then you also want to look at students who go on to the grad education or PhD, comparing the national versus your data. Again, you might look at that. Race and ethnicity is going to be easier than McNair eligible. And you can also look at by field. So if you are hoping to narrow down and say STEM specific, you can look at that data by fields and be able to compare your institution versus nationally. And then you can look at race and other things too. So broadly, all students, white students, students of color, right? And then you also want to look at careers that require a doctorate and have low representation of McNair eligible students, because this is one of the components in the needs. It's in the needs section. I'm trying to remember if it's in the operations. Anyway, we'll get to it. But this is specifically parsed out as one of those things that you'll need to be able to talk about. So you want to look at that data and say, okay, nationally, we have these areas that are underrepresented. You're really building this case for like why we need this program to help our students go on to graduate school to then get those types of jobs. And faculty being the obvious career that requires that doctorate degree. But there's a number of others. And again, in those resources at the end, I have links linked to a resource that on labor, I think it's labor statistics or something like that, that you can actually plug and play and put in things on your own to kind of explore that. And so getting this data, it's It's a lot. So you want to try to identify the data that you're going to need as soon as possible, especially the stuff that you're going to need from your institution. You'll want to get a meeting with that institutional research person to go over what you're going to need from them and try to come up with a timeline. And so, of course, they will like you more. The more organized you can be, the earlier you can come to them for that ask. But much of what you're going to do is going to hinge on getting that data from them. And so this is really a first step. Then you also want to figure out what is that stuff you can get on your own, mostly that national stuff that you can go ahead and pull, and you can get started with that right away. And this is going to be tedious and time consuming. And that's just the facts, so start early. Okay, I'll pause there because we're going to switch and talk more about the proposal more specifically in the next section. So questions, thoughts, etc. on the stuff that we just covered.
I had a question in terms of the data. Is there a requirement for it to be, or what's the requirements in terms of how recent the data are? Do they want like fall 2020 information, or where is that?
The more recent, the better. I think 2020 data would be ideal. If you could get 2020 or like the 2020-2021 academic year. We are coming out of COVID. Well, I mean, we're still in COVID, let's be honest. But because of COVID, you could make a justification for why you were using older data if you couldn't use this most recent academic year's data. And you would need to explain that in your narrative, say, due to, COVID, we were unable to get these, process this most recent years, or we think that this year is really an anomaly, which I think we could all probably attest to. But, that this data might be slightly different than a typical year. And so that might be a reason to use older data if you had to. It's a great question.
If you do have a student support services on your campus, or had somebody on your campus who wrote for it recently, they have a lot of this data in that proposal. We wrote for 3 of them and lost all of them by a point. We have no SSS, so we had to have a perfect score. We got 2 99s and I think a 94 out of, or whatever, the 1 point's off.
It's heartbreaking. Oh my gosh.
So if anybody on your campus wrote for it, or you have one, they have kind of the nuts, the meat of what you need, and then you tailor it for McNair.
Anything else on this? Okay, we'll move along. Okay, so on the proposal, and talking about points, this brings us to this slide. So this is a breakdown of the proposal and the points and for each of these sections. So the need section is 16 points, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. Objectives are 9 points, and we'll spend a little bit of time on that. Plan of operation is 44 points, and so we will definitely talk about that. Quality of key personnel is 9 points. Adequacy of resources and budget is 15, and evaluation plan is 7. And due to time, I don't think we will spend much on that, but maybe in the Q&A we can talk more about those 3 sections. And so altogether, that's 100 points for that selection criteria maximum score. The competitive preferences priorities, last cycle was worth 5 points. We don't know what the points will be this time, but we can expect something similar. Which gives you a grand total of 105 points possible. You definitely want to write to the competitive preference priority. So you don't want to just skip that. You do need to write that, even though it is technically optional. But as a new program, every point will matter. And so you will want to write to that. And so once you get that competitive preference priority, again, that's going to be something that comes out January or February when we get the real RFP for 2022. Then you'll have to kind of backtrack and hopefully add that back into the rest of the grant as needed. So it might be something where it's like, if it was using the 2017 example of STEM, maybe you didn't have much about STEM in your needs initially because you were planning to be an all disciplines program. Well, now you need to go back and add more on your needs around STEM. And then similarly in your objectives, maybe you're going to add a little bit about STEM. And so every category is going to need to go back and be tailored a little bit to add that back in and weave it into the entire proposal. Okay, so couple on these three areas of the proposal that we're going to talk about a little more in depth. I'm going to put in the technical legislative language here of what each of these is. So need is again 16 points. And so it says that our secretary reviews each application to determine the extent to which the applicant can clearly and definitively demonstrate the need for a McNair project to serve the target population. In particular, Secretary looks for information that clearly defines the target population, describes the academic, financial, and other problems that prevent potentially eligible project participants in the target population from completing baccalaureate programs and continuing to post-baccalaureate programs, and demonstrates that the project's target population is underrepresented in graduate education, doctoral degrees conferred, and careers where doctorate is a prerequisite. And so we will break that down, but I wanted to give you the technical language before we kind of dive in. Okay, so I see these as kind of 4 buckets, although the first 2 go together. So the first is that clearly and definitively demonstrate that need. And so that's really where that you're going to be working on all of that data to show what's happening on your campus, how that you actually have that target population. So you're defining that target population on your campus for who is on campus and going to be, potentially part of this program, and showing that, yes, you do in fact have the number of students, both just in sheer numbers, but also in interest in graduate degrees, to make a McNair program make sense for your campus. So you want to make sure that that is pretty obvious in that needs section. This is the only section, the need is the only section that doesn't have clear questions. The other ones have questions and things that you are working towards and points assigned to them. The need section is just 16 points to answer, answer, or I guess prove that you meet the needs, for having a program. The kind of second one to think about is this academic and financial problems that would prevent a target population from finishing their bachelor's degree or going on to graduate education. And so for this, you're going to think about what are, and these don't have to necessarily be specific to your institution, right? These can be, things that are nationally issues. So what are academic problems? Well, things like lack of mentors, right? So not seeing yourself in the academy, not seeing somebody like you who has that type of degree. Other academic things could be, things, around needing those tutoring services and not having access to them or things like that. So thinking about what it is that might, prevent a student from being able to really either finish their bachelor's degree or go on to graduate degree. Thinking about the population, it's first gen, right? So they may not know how to navigate college. They may not know how to access resources. And so it really comes to that, knowing how to navigate the system. And so again, by having a McNair program, you're helping them to navigate all of those things by giving them the seminars, giving them the advising that you're going to be doing, and really, helping them through that process, right? Financial problems, and of course here we're talking about a population who is low income, and so access, understanding, all of those things that come with finances, financial aid, also understanding fellowships and things like that. So once they do get to graduate school, knowing how to access those types of funds so that they don't have debt. So an example that you could do for this would be to look at what's the national debt for different populations of like race or first gen versus not, at the graduate level, right? So not just at the baccalaureate, but at the graduate level. So what's that debt? How does that compare as we look at these populations? And spoiler alert, I can tell you that the students of color have higher debt than the white students. And so, you know, this is a pretty easy thing for you to be able to show. So just trying to give you a couple examples of things that can help you to prove this need. And again, you can use national information. It doesn't have to be specific to your institution. And then, of course, that your target population is underrepresented in grad education, doctoral degree attainment, and careers that require that doctorate. And so again, this is pretty easy to do with national data. So here, we're talking about first gen low income students and students of color. They are underrepresented in graduate education, which also means that there are fewer that are going to get doctoral degree attainment and therefore be less in those careers. But you will want to show that with data to be able to, and also with your narrative, of course, explaining that data, but you'll want to pull lots of resources for these things. So I'll pause so that we can see what questions there are here.
Does it, Cami, I'm sorry, does it also help to describe the demographics of the faculty serving a Hispanic serving institution and the lack of potentially underrepresented minorities in the faculty?
You mean to show how white your faculty are?
Or, you know,
yes, it does. Sorry for the sarcasm. Yes, definitely. I think that would be something. If you're talking about the you know, part of the academic problems is that, you know, they don't have mentors, and saying, you know, our faculty is currently X percentage Hispanic, and we're primarily a Hispanic serving institution. You know, like, yes, I think that's a great way to demonstrate that. You could also, you know, if you don't have that data for your institution, you could look at national, but I think that would be a great example of something you could do locally. If there are synergistic things that you could do, you could also be thinking about, like, if you have like a diversity task force, or you have a committee or something that's especially focused on trying to recruit and retain, you know, new faculty of color, maybe that's something you're talking about, that's a way in which you're hoping to address that and improve it, and that could go along with this McNair program. You know, this is a great question.
Cami, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
This is a general points question. So there's 105 points overall for the proposal, and if you do the priority question, the 15 points, up to 15 points you were talking about for institutions that already have that, is that used to fill in gaps that they might have in their 105 point total, or is that something different?
They get that in addition, so it's hard. So yeah, if they do have gaps in their proposal, then, you know, that might make up for it, where that they can continue to get funding over a new program, even though they don't have like a perfect proposal, whereas we need perfect proposals as new programs.
We do need perfect proposals. Do you have a sense of how many new institutions receive funding each cycle versus those that are existing or reapplying?
I think it depends on the cycle. Shanice, do you remember the 2017 numbers? I don't off the top of my head.
I wouldn't know the 2017 because I wasn't involved.
Oh, you said 2011.
Yeah, right. So there were a few new ones who were established in 2011. Every year there's a few new ones. So because we did SSS proposals on our campus, somebody put out the slate, and it was like in a shared Google Drive, and I should have saved it, and I didn't. And that slate showed how many were new and how many, and it's amazing how badly written grants are, because you could see how many points an established campus had and then how many prior experience points. So like, they really have to have it's interesting. It's very hard to get a new grant. Let's put it, it's very hard.
It is.
And even this year, we did work with COE with the SSS grants that we lost, and you know that there's some inconsistency with how they took points off. One of our grant got full points on an area that another grant had the same language and got a point off. The point I lost has been in every grant that I've written, and the same language, and I've successfully gotten upper bound math science, brand new grant, successfully renewed McNair with a perfect score. So it's it varies on who the reviewers are. It varies on cycle to cycle. It's not impossible because it's happened.
Yes.
But it's tough.
I think in
Perfect
2017,
grant is the answer. Write a perfect grant.
You need to have
right,
a perfect,
that's all. That's all.
but your perfect grant depends on the reviewers, because
Yep.
I wrote a perfect grant and got a point off still for something that I always got a full score on. So, and I anticipate, we have 2 pending on our campus now, one that I wrote, one in the other that I assisted with that was submitted by a colleague. You know, we anticipate, we're looking forward to what they dock us on this time. Hopefully nothing, so we get at these grants, but it's kind of, it's different than Lsamp, but some ways I think better that they say this is what we want, and you know, it's really up to you to lose those points, because a lot of it is very defined for you of what you need to show.
Sure.
But it's not impossible. But
Yeah.
we do need to, it does mean that some currently funded, unless they put more money into the pot, some currently funded grants need to lose funding for us to get in, for new grants to get in.
Thank you.
No, that's true. And there'll be 3 folks that review it. And of course, you know, it's luck of the draw for, you know, how that they score, you know, and how that they receive what you've put in there. And so there's some luck in that. And unfortunately, because it's humans, it's not, you know, consistent. And so that's a challenge too. But that's a good question. Other things while we're here in the needs section? Okay. So next up, we'll talk about objectives. So here is the language that comes again from the legislation. Objectives are worth 9 points. You know, again, hopefully we're going to be able to get these points. So secretary evaluates quality of the applicant's objectives and proposed targets. So the percentages in the following areas on the basis of the extent to which they are both ambitious as related to the need data provided under the previous section and attainable given the project's plan of operation, budget, and other resources. So for each of these 4 objectives, you have to include why that it is going to be ambitious and why that it is going to be attainable. And so these are, again, as I mentioned, the first one, the section on need, the 16 points is not laid out by, you know, bullet, whereas everything going forward is laid out by bullet. So each of these is worth, you know, 2 points. Enrollment in grad school is worth 3. So 2 points for research or scholarly activity. So you want to talk about why that it's ambitious. So you're going to be looking again at that campus data. How many students do you currently have doing research projects as undergraduates? How many of them are McNair eligible, right? So maybe you could say here, you currently have 20% of the McNair eligible students are doing research compared to 55% of, say, non-McNair eligible, right? And so it's ambitious that you're going to have, say, 90% of your McNair scholars doing research or scholarly activities. But it's attainable because of whatever plan that you're putting forward for the McNair Scholars Program. And so you want to talk about the ambition as well as the attainable. So first you have to kind of set that stage of here's what's happening. Then you have to talk about why it's ambitious for what your goal is. So each of these are going to have to set a percentage, and you're going to be judged on those every year. And those are also going to be how that you're getting those prior experience points going forward. So you want to pick a number that is ambitious compared to where your institution is currently at, but not too ambitious that you will miss the mark because you need those points in the future so that you are that funded program that continues to get funded every year, right? Or every 5 years. So, you know, I think for a research or scholarly activity, 85% would probably be the bare minimum that you should be doing for this. You should really be aiming for 90% or higher probably for that. Research or other scholarly activity is research is obvious. Like we know what research is, right? Academic year research or summer research, that's obvious. We know what that is. Scholarly activity has some really specific language around it. So it has like 4 things that it has to meet. It has to have a beginning and an end. It has to be more rigorous than what would typically be experienced in a classroom. It has to be with a faculty member, and I forget the 4th one, but there's a 4th one. And so maybe I don't know, something about completion or something like that. And so this is something that you can write into your grant what might qualify as a scholarly activity, because then you have that to go back on later, which is really important. So one of the things that was in my grant at Wellesley was that a scholarly activity would be, you know, attending a research conference, right? Attending conferences to present their research or just to attend. And so there's a number of McNair conferences that are available across the country that are hosted. And then there's also things like Abercam, SACNAS, ACES, et cetera, that you could also consider, as well as discipline specific conferences. But that could count as a scholarly activity, just for an example there. And so that's something that should be really easily attainable for you to hit that mark. That's going to be your go-to, that like you're definitely sure you're going to hit that. Enrollment in a graduate program, this is 3 points on those objectives. Again, you're going to look at what's your data, either nationally or at your institution, looking at those McNair eligible folks. You're going to say, okay, at my school right now, we have like 5% of students that are McNair eligible that go on to, you know, graduate programs, and compared to, I don't know, 25, whatever it might be, percent of non-McNair eligible. And so we're going to aim for, you know, 50% of our McNair scholars to enroll in graduate programs. And so that's ambitious because you're comparing it to what it is currently. So if it goes from 5 to 50, that's pretty ambitious. But again, it's going to be attainable because you're doing all these things with your McNair Scholars Program to help them prepare and be ready for that. You know, this one's a tough one because remember that the students have to go immediately to graduate school for this to count. And so for those points, they have to go straight from undergrad to graduate school. So that's something to keep in mind there. Continuing enrollment and graduate study, again, that's probably going to be based not on your own institutional data, but on national data, because I think that would likely be difficult for you to obtain for your institution. But if you do have a graduate school, they might have that type of data that you could use as a proxy for this. So seeing how many go on from Persist, basically Persist in graduate school. So you'll look at that national data and think about what would be ambitious for you to suggest and how that you're going to say that that's attainable. Hiram?
Yes, Cami, the continued enrollment in graduate studies, like, do we have to keep track of when the students join a PhD program or another graduate program or another institution? Do we have to keep track of them even though they're already gone? And how much time
for
after
10 years.
10 years.
10 years, you got to track these kiddos. Yep. Shanice?
And so I will say, when I write these grants, all of that data, I don't put it in the objection section. I actually put it in the needs section. So I would write in the needs section about the percentages of our campus students and national doing research and scholarly activity. That way my objection section can be very clean and just focus on, they give you specific language you have to use. So I'm really referring back to the numbers that are in that needs section.
Yeah, you could do that. You could also, yeah, recycle those numbers that you've really outlined very clearly in that needs section.
Yeah, I definitely have both the number, why it's objective, what the number is, why it's attainable, why it's the other.
Yeah, you're not putting the graphs in this part. The
Correct.
graphs are already established and that kind of stuff. Yeah, you're referencing back.
And then you do, like, when you're actually running the program, all of our students coming in needed to sign paperwork saying that we could access their records once they graduate. So if you don't have the National Student Clearinghouse, you would have the right to contact the school if they enrolled in, so that you can keep that data. This is a small cohort. This is not nearly like a student support services where you have hundreds of students. So it is, only a percentage of your students would be graduating off each year. So I do think it's relatively manageable to track over time. And I use a lot of social media. I'm still Facebook and LinkedIn to a number of our McNair scholars from Binghamton University. And I've worked there, I started there in 2007.
Yeah, no, exactly. So yeah, you'll once you've gotten the successful grant, let me know, and I'm happy to share forms and things with you to help you with that language around, making sure that the students agree to the 10 years of tracking that they're signing up for, and also getting other folks on board, in your institution, so that they know that you can have access to their records as part of managing the program. And then the last one on the objectives is that doctoral degree attainment. And so that is after 10 years post graduating undergrad. So it's there's 2 points for that. And you're again looking at why is it ambitious? Why is it attainable? And so this is going to be, it's typically a fairly small number that you're going to have for that. But you want to talk about why it would be ambitious based on national numbers or likely national numbers, and then why that you're going to make that attainable through your program. So and then plan of operation, I have several hidden slides here that go through all of this. I am not going to read this language to you. So there are 9 points on the plan of not 9 points, there's 44 points, but there's 9 points of these, like 1, 2, 3 that are on the left hand side of things that have to be included in this plan of operation. So we will talk about those on the next slide, but this is the official language, and in the slides that you'll get, I have pasted all 9 of them so that you have them to reference, but you also have the actual legislation stuff too that you can refer back to. So so this is them in a little more digestible format, and so it's starting here. This is like number 1 and then going all the way around to 9. So the first is the recruiting and admitting. So you have to include in your plan of operation what you will do to recruit students to be part of this cohort, and how that you are going to select them to be in that cohort. So be thinking about what are the strategies and things. Are you going to hold info sessions? Are you going to work with institutional research to come up with a list to be emailing? Are you going to host, I don't know, have your current scholars help you recruit? What are the methods and things that you're going to be doing? Or are you going to be partnering with faculty to maybe, say, can I come to your class for 5 minutes and give a pitch? So what are those mechanisms that you're going to be trying to get the students? And then once you've got applicants, what's that selection process? So who's reading those applications? What are the materials that you're going to be, asking for? What does that look like? And so likely you're going to have a team of folks that are going to be reviewing those applications, mix of staff and faculty, to be thinking about that. And you may also want to think about whether or not you're going to have an interview process. I highly recommend the interview because the paper applications are great, but you would not believe night and day the transformations that students make in those interviews. And so important to kind of hear from them directly. And then the next thing is individual needs and academic monitoring. So they want you to come up with a plan of how that you're going to assess those individual needs of the students that are in the program. So how are you going to be supporting them in their individual things that they need for their support, and then also how are you going to be tracking their academic progress. So you could think of it like doing like grade reports. You know how athletes have to do like grade reports, grade checks, like you could do something like that. You could work with your registrar's office to kind of check in. You could, to see what those midterm grade evaluations are, and then getting the end of the semester data. How are you going to have that academic monitoring of their progress and that they are maintaining, a good GPA. Research and other scholarly activities, again, keeps coming up because it is super important to this. So how are you going to facilitate that research and other scholarly activities? So here is where you might list like what those other scholarly activities could include. So again, meeting those 4 metrics that they have in the legislation around what counts as a scholarly activity. Faculty mentors. So how are the faculty going to be engaged? How are they going to be involved in the research process? And how are they going to be, providing mentoring for your students? And so this would be a good area to be identifying some folks on campus, who are already committed to the project and who, are willing to, serve as those faculty mentors and advisors to students. The internships and seminars, again, this is the bread and butter kind of the program. So you want to talk about how you're going to offer those internships. Is the internship going to be for, a summer research institute where that they get a stipend for participating in that? Or is it going to be that they're doing research full time, 8 or 10 weeks over the summer to get that pay? What is it that constitutes that internship? And so that's going to be really dependent on how you want to design the program for your institution. Seminars, of course, being, things around supporting them in their interest in applying to grad school, offering, different workshops like resume and cover letter and that kind of stuff, or whatever it may be for their professional development, for preparation for grad school applications, etc. Could be financial literacy, things like that as well, and those May services. And then grad admission services. So that's, again, I feel like these are like the 2 like bread and butter, like these are the things you have to do to make the program to even make sense. Grad admission services. So what are you doing to help those students prepare for graduate school? So again, that's going to fall into some of those seminars and things like that, but maybe you're going to take them to a boot camp, or maybe you're going to take them to a conference that has a boot camp. You could take them to the LSMRC annual conference and see me do a workshop called PhD. Why not me? That happens. This will be, I think, the 3rd year running that I'll do that. So there's things like that you could put as part of that process. Institutional communication. So how are you going to communicate about this program to your institution? So how are you going to let senior leadership know what you're doing, or other stakeholders on campus know the progress that you're making on this grant, so that they're aware of what's happening with the grant and with your students, and basically making a brag book on all of your successes. Grant administration, this is not the fun part, but this is everything from tracking the finances. How are you going to be, managing that budget? How are you going to be doing that kind of all the filing, so much filing, all of that type of stuff. But really the kind of nuts and bolts of like the behind the scenes, the not fun stuff. In my opinion, I like the working with the students, but that part that's needed to make the grant operate. And then finally that piece, Hiram, the 10 years of alumni tracking. So how are you going to do that? So you have to have that in your plan of operation of, yes, I'm going to Facebook stalk all my kids. No, but you're going to, talk about the National Student Clearinghouse and how that you can track the students on that. You might talk about how that you're going to have an annual survey for your alumni, asking them to update you on, where they're at. You might think of other ways like creating LinkedIn group, so you have a professional group that maybe all of your students can be members of. And behind the scenes, you're doing all of the social media stalking, but this is what you're formally saying that you're doing in the alumni tracking part. Questions here? And each of these are assigned different points, all of which are outlined in that actual, in the slides, as well as in the legislation for you in that RFP that gives you all of that information.
Cami, can maybe you're going to say this in a few minutes, but can you give a sense of the type of staffing that is required? Because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay,
yes,
that's a lot.
So the staffing is very dependent on, your institution and what it will allow. I'm not planning on talking about that, so it's a great question, because we have 10 minutes. But I can talk about it now because it's a great question. So typically you would have, I would say, a minimum of 2 full-time FTE committed to the grant. I would recommend more. So I ran a grant that we had 2 FTE, and that was so much to do. So you're gonna have so again, depends on your institution, how you want to structure it, but many institutions have it where that the director would be a full-time staff member, so 100% to the grant. That may be partially paid by your institution and by the grant. It might be 100% paid by the grant, totally up to you. So sometimes this could be somebody who is shared. So it could be if you have a lot of trio programs, you might have a director who's split amongst a few different trio programs. Could be your Lsamp director, could also be your McNair director, and so they're split across those 2 programs. If you have a McNair director who is not doing one of those other programs as the other portion of their job, so say a faculty member or something else, then you have to get prior approval by the Department of Education to get that as a percent commitment of that person. So that's another layer of caveat. I know folks who are like McNair directors, and then they're also like, say, a director of an undergrad research office or something along those lines. Then you're going to want somebody else to work under them. So, that might be a full-time assistant director or associate director. Who, and again, it depends on the structure. So the director could be the end all be all that does so many of these things. Some have it where that the director is kind of part-time, and then this assistant or associate director really does the running of the program. Some people have a advisor or a counselor who is specifically there to advise the students on their kind of grad applications and things like that as a second staff member. And then some institutions also say have a third person who's going to be a support staff person. So somebody who's either a coordinator or a staff assistant or something along those lines, who's going to help with some of this other administrative tasks. So things like in the grant administration bucket. So, the purchase card processing and, financial card processing, that kind of stuff, and other paperwork filing, or ordering food and booking spaces on campus, and, all of those other things that come with it. So personally, I would recommend 2.5 to 3 FTE if you can get it. If you can afford it in the grant and you can get your institution to agree.
You can always ask.
You can always ask, yes.
Cami, how many students did you have at Wellesley in the program?
We were funded for 27. I think we typically had 30.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
There's a question of are faculty stipends an allowable cost?
So for I'm not sure who asked, but are you asking about for like research supplies, or are you asking about just for paying them, compensating them for their time?
I guess it depends on what's allowable. We just recognize that we want to make sure that our faculty are compensated for what they're being provided, in addition to being able to provide undergraduate students to assist them with their research so that they can get that experience. one of the conversations with our faculty is limited funds available for them to go to research conferences, to present and that kind of thing, where it would be a very valuable experience if they were accompanied by undergraduate students. So the question would be, in their performance of supporting our undergraduate students gain access to research and research activities, would it be an allowable expense to award stipends?
So there is like personnel travel is one of the categories in the budget. So like for going to conferences, I could see where that potentially you could have the faculty also accompany, but typically the director or one of the staff members would be who would accompany the students to the conferences. I do know of grants who are funded who do provide stipends to the faculty. You know, they don't say what it's for, whether it's for supplies or whether it's just for the faculty to keep or use, you know, as they choose. So I do know projects that are funded that have that as a line item that they pay their faculty mentors. The problem with that is that, you know, there's only so much money. And such a huge chunk is going to go to salary to pay your staff to run the program. And then the other huge is going to be in what we call participant travel, although it's a silly name because it includes the stipends and also like taking the students to conferences, taking the students to grad school visits and things like that. And that's a huge chunk of your budget. So if there was money enough to left over that you felt like you could do that, sure, certainly you could build that in, but you'd have to really justify it because I think that you know, reviewer would say, well, why don't you just fund more kids, right? Like, why isn't this money going back to the kids instead of going to the faculty? And so you'd have to, I think, you know, make a strong argument for that if you weren't going to use institutional match funding for that.
Perfect. That helps because it prioritizes where the readers are going to look for funding.
At least that's my opinion. I don't know if Shanice has other thoughts.
So Binghamton, when I started there, had just moved away from faculty stipends, and it was a budget issue. The cost of staff, and that was a lean. The project director, my project director was a very part-time, small summer salary, full faculty member. Myself was a full-time, day-to-day associate director that ran the operations. And then I had a part-time secretary who became full-time when we merged McNair and Lsamp together. Yep. But even for Lsamp as well, we did not have money for faculty stipends because the indirect and then the fringe, because there would be fringe from our research arm, that the research foundation. What we did allow for both Lsamp and McNair was student supplies, because that would be under allowable costs under participant support, which is much cheaper. Right. So we could say you get $500 per student in your lab. Yep. They can buy those the supplies we can reimburse, or we can purchase the supplies on their behalf.
Yeah.
And then if a faculty was going to conference, we always had travel funds, and we could support the students' travel, but not that faculty members' travel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I think that the supplies is an easier sell, like, you know, getting them, you know, research supplies. And I would say as a faculty member, I'm more concerned about, like, you know, trying to manage like what grants I have and where I'm able to, you know, spend and also what time I have to spend. Whereas like if somebody came in and was like, here's $500 for this specific student and you can spend it how you need on that project, that would be really helpful to me, because so many other things are restricted and have, you know, lots of yeah, just restrictions. So yeah. Okay, we only have a couple minutes and I have just a few more slides, but we're very close to the end. So I just want to make sure that we get through some of this content, and then I'm happy to stay on later for questions and stuff too. So we are expecting that there will be a logic model. They had a logic model for the last cycle. This was something that was kind of introduced in the Obama administration. And so I was not familiar with logic models. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time. Last time they had the logic model as part of that competitive priority preferences. So it was built into those points. And looking at these most recent competitions for the other TRIO programs, some of them has been part of that CPP, the competitive priority preferences, and some of them have been built into the grant and an expectation. So I think either way you can expect, you have to create a logic model. And so I spent some time Googling and kind of tried to consolidate a number of different resources for you here and what this logic model looks like. And so you start with the planned work, so the things that you are planning to do with your program. So what are those resources? What are those activities? What are the seminars, the staff, the personnel, et cetera, that you're going to be putting into this program. And then you want to look at what are your intended results. And so those will be the outputs, the outcomes, and the impact. So these are what you're predicting are going to happen in your logic model. And so this can be really helpful for kind of setting up your framework for designing your program and putting together this proposal. So it is a place that people say you should start instead of end with. So this will be something that probably will go through a number of iterations for you. And as you think about those intended results, you want to think about the short term, the kind of medium term, and the long term impacts, and outcomes and outputs, right? So what's going to come of that? So things like, okay, if we host a seminar on, I don't know, resumes and CVs, then we could expect that our students are going to have, better resumes and CVs, which should lead to them getting better jobs, which should lead to, I don't know, increased income or something. I don't know. But it's kind of thinking about how do these things that you're planning to do, the work that you're going to do, actually result in something that you're hoping for. And so you put that together in a logic model, and you can use different colors. You can use lots and lots of, you can use circles or boxes or whatever shape you want, but generally they're going to be connected with some arrows or whatever, kind of directing you through the process. And so this is an incredibly simplified version of what you would be putting together for this. And so at the end of the slides, I do have a number of resources on developing a logic model to help you get started. And then identifying resources. I feel like we've spent a lot of time on this, but there's a couple things in here that I thought was important to highlight again. So again, as you think about resources on your campus, people are resources. So be thinking about those folks that you can tap into. And as I'm talking about this, the resources, what I'm thinking about here is more in as you develop a budget and you're thinking about institutional commitment to this. People can give workshops and you can assign dollar cost to them and say, hey, whatever, Susie from finance is going to give this workshop, and I think it's worth $1,500 because she's going to be teaching financial literacy and all these things. Great. Thanks, Susie. Except it's free for you, but it's worth $1,500, and you get to say that. And so you want to be really creative. One resource that you're going to need for this is space. So that's also something that you need to identify is where is this program going to live? Should you be successful? Where are those offices going to be for these people that you're hiring? And a space for your students to be in. And so space matters. And so that's something that you can definitely say is a cost that your institution is providing. So again, on that institutional commitment. Computers is, the computers in the labs and things like that, but also is your institution going to give do they always give a computer, a laptop, whatever, desktop to new staff? And so maybe that's something that your institution is committed to doing that, is something they would do anyway, but you get to write it down as a, institutional match. Workshops, again, I already talked about that. Summer tuition waivers. So if you could get either summer tuition waivers or academic year tuition waivers, however if you do a formal course, getting that waiver could be an institutional commitment that you could have. Tutoring, we've talked about that. Advising, so trying to kind of quantify that, what that might look like for, utilizing that advising team. Faculty time, you could also try to quantify, for those that are going to be kind of volunteering to mentor your students and or lead workshops or whatever they might be doing. So thinking of that as kind of in-kind funding that you could be being creative with on these resources. You will want to get commitment letters from all of the folks who say that they're going to do stuff for you. And so those are not due with the grant, but you want to hold on to those so that if you are successful, you have those letters to always refer back to. You want to make sure that they understand that this is for a 5-year commitment. This is not a one-off. So you want to make sure that you have all of that. So it's just to have in your files and things like that. And so getting those commitment letters will be important, and start early. Can't emphasize that enough, start early. Okay, and then writing the proposal, just a couple of comments and then we're at the end. So this should not be a solo endeavor. Please do not attempt this on your own. You need to have other friends and folks on campus who are going to help you. So identify those resources, maybe build an advisory board. Maybe that's going to be a mix of faculty and staff who are going to help you with this process. Pick folks that you want their input, and that it's okay to ignore their input if you decided to not do it. So be strategic in that if you have strong opinions and want your way. Be thinking about that strategically, who you would put on your advisory board. Work really closely with that sponsored research or grants office to help you with that process of submitting and getting the proposal together. And then some campuses do have grant writers or are willing to pay grant writers to do this type of work. And so if you have access to that, by all means, you are much luckier than me. And so take advantage of that. But my guess is you probably don't, since you're here, or maybe some of you are grant writers yourself. So I don't know. Thank you for sticking with me for 2 hours. And again, these will be in the slides, but I wanted to show you, I have it broken down into application resources. These are the things that are directly from Department of Education, the RFP, which you've already gotten from the Department of Education website. There is information for applicants, the laws and regulations and guidance. These are the two that I think are probably the most important for you all. And then prior experience points, because we did talk about that. Again, this is not something for now, but really to build your program to be able to get those points as you move forward. Data resources. So Hiram, as promised, here they are. And these are adapted from Dr. Mary Gonzalez's presentation. So I want to make sure to give her credit. She is a COE consultant, TRIO consultant, and really phenomenal partner in the TRIO work. And so these are all resources that I use. And so, and she had them in hers as well. So I want to make sure to give her credit. And then logic model resources, there's the USAID and Johns Hopkins have put together this how-to guide. Pell Institute did a toolkit in collaboration with the Council for Opportunity and Education. And Johns Hopkins actually has a template, which I'll share with you. So you'll have that. And then I found this one really helpful. Minnesota Department of Health had a logic model tip sheet that had a ton of other resources actually at the end of it to help you continue to do that. So with that, I will take any additional questions. I know we're at time, so I apologize, but I'm happy to hang with you. And please contact me. This is all of my contact information. I'm on all the social media, though not regularly, with the same handle, my website, my email, and then this is a photo that one of my McNair scholars, Tulani, designed for me. That's really, I love. So questions?